Hi guys, my name is Alex Prokopchak and my paper is over altitude training. What is altitude training? All athletes seek a competitive advantage, and training at a high altitude has been used by competitive athletes as a means of improving their potential. Altitude training is the practice by some endurance athletes of training for a period of time at a high altitude to try and benefit their performances. There are 3 types of altitude training. It's high to high, high to low, and low to high, and this is the most common. What is high altitude and how does it differ from other altitudes? Altitude is described as the height of an object or point in relation to sea level or ground level. Sea level is at 0, and anything below sea level goes into the negative, and anything above sea level goes into the positive. Altitude is defined as on the following scale. High, 8,000 to 12,000 feet, very high, 12,000 to 18,000 feet, and extremely high, 18,000 feet plus. The environment is very different at higher altitudes compared to that at sea level. The air becomes much thinner and temperatures are usually colder the higher you go up. How long do you have to train at altitude? To reap the benefits, it can take weeks to see the effects of the training, months to better prepare the athletes for performances like the Olympics, or years to do things like climb Mount Everest. The body has to make a lot of changes in order to cope better with the lack of oxygen at higher altitudes. This process is called acclimatization. If you don't acclimatize properly, you greatly increase your chance of developing some sort of illness. In a roundtable discussion between 4 experts on altitude training for athletes, the average best altitude and best duration were 2,200 meters for 4 weeks. These coaches also thought that the effects of altitude training were optimal 2 to 3 weeks after return from altitude. How long does it take to declimatize? The unfortunate part about altitude training for most athletes is most of the positive effects of altitude are lost over time upon returning to lower altitudes. In about 15 days, the increase in red blood cells is lost. Other adaptations, like the change in how the body uses energy, stay with the body longer but will eventually be lost if not kept up with the continual training. There are some different forms of altitude training. While some athletes at the professional level have the time and money to go and train at different locations to reap the benefits of altitude training, others don't. So companies have made different ways of getting the same benefits without having to spend the time and money traveling. One of these methods is the altitude training mask. The mask has a nasal portion for covering the user's nose and lower portion for covering the user's mouth. A peripheral edge comfortably fits with the face, forms a chamber with the user's mouth and nose contained therein. A valve-controlled air channel presents a first exterior aperture in communication with the outside ambient air and a second interior aperture positioned adjacent to the user's mouth. A fibrous filter are visibly engageable within the air channel. Upon inhalation, the oxygen density of the ambient air as drawn through the air channel and through the fibrous filters is decreased. The decrease replicates the decrease in oxygen found in the ambient air at higher altitude, which requires the user to increase the breathing effort as to deliver a sufficient amount of oxygen to the bloodstream. Upon exhalation, the exhaled air is discharged through the valve-controlled exhaust ports. These masks work by utilizing an advanced peripheral air resistance valve system, which means that it makes it harder to breathe, making each breath more effective and causing more red blood cells to produce. The flex valves provide you with multiple levels of air resistance so you can use the mask at any fitness level, and each breath through these masks isolates your diaphragm and intercostals and makes it possible to get the same results as actual altitude training. And if you look, I have pulled up a picture of the mask. I'm sure many people have seen them being used. Now, what are the benefits of altitude training? There are many benefits to altitude training. Some are short-term effects, meaning that they are quick changes that happen to the body but can be short-lived, and then there are long-term effects that take longer to set in and can stay in the body longer. Short-term effects of altitude training can be increased resting and submaximal heart rates, increased blood pressure, hyperventilation, decreased plasma volume, increased resistance of glucose, decreased weight because of the lack of appetite, and shift in resources away from digestion. The long-term effects of altitude training can be increased heart rate at submaximal training, increased blood pressure, hyperventilation, decreased plasma volume, increased hippocrate, increased hemoglobin, increased capitalization in the muscles, increased mitochondrial density, increased myoglobin, increased resistance on glycolysis, decreased weight, and body composition changes. What are the harms of altitude training? While some athletes benefit from altitude training, some are actually harmed from it. If a person goes too fast into it and tries to change altitudes too quickly, or has a disease like sickle cell, then any of the following problems can happen: dehydration, low blood sugar, loss of appetite, inhibition of muscle repair processes, excessive work of breathing, hypothermia, which has 3 forms: mild hypothermia, which is 32 to 35 degrees Celsius, moderate hypothermia, which is 30 to 32 degrees Celsius, and severe hypothermia, less than 30 degrees Celsius. You can also have altitude sickness, which also has 3 forms. There's mild altitude sickness called acute mountain sickness, or AMS, HAPE, which is high altitude pulmonary embolism, or HACE, which is high altitude cerebral edema, and in severe cases, death. Does altitude training actually work? Many elite athletes believe that training at altitude improves sea level performance, yet the scientific evidence, such as it is, would seem to refute that, suggesting that the athlete's trust must be replaced. Hence, at present, elite athletes should neither be encouraged to nor discouraged from training at altitude. Individual experience, rigorously evaluated, is the sole method by which conclusions can be drawn for individual athletes. Even a 1% improvement in performance will not make a sub-elite athlete elite. Hence, there is no reason to encourage sub-elite athletes to train at altitude, meaning that experts believe that altitude training, while it does have some benefits, doesn't actually help the athlete's performance as a whole. And that's basically my paper. Thanks, guys.